I am the lawyer that hates lawyers. The way somebody does anything is how they do everything. I hear no. Does that mean no, not right now? Well, how about in 10 minutes? Well, if not in 10 minutes, how about tomorrow? The only reality that you're limited to is your mind. It could always be better, it could always be worse, but we're here. We're alive. If you can become memorable, you can become unforgettable. Today, we're gonna do 3 things, and if you do these 3 things, you're gonna shatter your goal.
Welcome to another episode of Fortunate Fishes. For over 15 years, Hillel Presser has helped the wealthy do something extraordinary. He's the guy that billionaires, athletes, first-gen entrepreneurs call when they want to protect what matters without losing who they are. But this conversation isn't about what Hillel built, it's about why. It's about a legacy for his children and his great-great-grandchildren he's never going to meet. About the values he worked harder to pass on than any portfolio. It's about the kid from Rochester who teamed up with a contestant from The Apprentice to launch a gourmet muffin company and sent muffins to Lindsay Lohan during house arrest. From muffins to millions, from stunts to strategy, this is the story how Hillel made himself judgment-proof, and what he protects now goes far beyond his wealth.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction.
You know, you launched 1-800-MUFFIN, sent a box to Lindsay Lohan when she's on house arrest, and you co-founded it with a contestant from The Apprentice. What were you chasing back then? Attention, leverage, or something deeper?
Maybe I'll start with the tagline that we had, which was 1-800-MUFFINS because muffins taste better than flowers. So... So it's interesting. Before we talk about 1-800-MUFFINS, I mean, it's probably, how did I get into the phone number business that led to 1-800-MUFFINS? So, when I was in law school, I was always very business oriented. I was always very entrepreneurial. And, I always liked to do things on my own. And when I was in law school, I bought my first telephone number for $107,000. When I used to tell people that, they used to look at me like I'm crazy. They would say, you bought a telephone number for $107,000. And, growing up, I had a lot of, family members who did a lot of advertising, marketing. So I knew the value of a good number.
But the number that you bought, can you just tell everybody what it was?
So the first number that I ever bought was 1-800-GREAT-RATE. And this was back when there were so many mortgage brokers out there. So think about it. You're a mortgage broker. You're spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year advertising. But when someone's driving 75 miles an hour on a highway and they see a billboard, are they going to remember 585-392-5862? Or are they going to remember for a great mortgage, for a great rate on a mortgage, call 1-800-GREAT-RATE? So what I did was I bought that phone number, 1-800-GREAT-RATE, and I leased it to one company per state. So there was a guy in Florida, and he would pay us a monthly fee, and he would advertise on bus benches, radio, TV ads for a great rate on a mortgage, call 1-800-GREAT-RATE. And if anybody called 1-800-GREAT-RATE from the state of Florida, I had it routed directly to his cell phone.
Let's say in the state of Florida, could you subdivide it even greater by zip code if you wanted to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I could have made a lot more money if I did it that way. However, I still had to pass law school. So I had to settle with by state. And I, leased it out to all the different states. And, during law school, I had a lot of reoccurring revenue coming in, which that got me into the phone number business.
Give us a sense of okay, you paid $107,000 for this number. How much money was it bringing in a week, a month, during the time that you were leasing it?
Yeah. So essentially, I would cold call people. I would buy lists that had the name Great Rate in their name. And I would literally cold call them and I'd say, when your potential customers only have 3 seconds to remember a phone number from an ad or a friend, would they remember your number or 1-800-GREAT-RATE?
How much money were you actually making, and how long before you got paid off that $107,000?
Oh, I made the money back very, very quickly. I was probably making 20, 30, 40,000 a month reoccurring revenue.
Jeez, that's brilliant. Okay.
And that's And that's by state. Like I said, if I wasn't
Right.
in
You
law
could have done it
school,
by zip code.
right,
Wow.
and that was my entry to the phone number business.
That's ingenious. Okay, so let's go back to Lindsay Lohan and
Yeah,
muffins. So
yeah,
now you bought the number 1-800 muffins.
yeah, yeah. I bought and sold and leased about 30 or 40 other phone numbers, one of them being 1-800 muffins, and we built an entire business around it. So, we were a gifting business. So, you think about it, the big things are like 1-800 flowers. Well, if we get flowers at my house, my wife thinks they're pretty. I look at them and say they're nice, but my 4-year-old and 9-year-old, they don't really care. But when you get a dozen muffins, chocolate chip cheesecake muffins, double chocolate chip brownie fudge, peanut butter chip with jelly, the whole family can enjoy it. And of course, it came on a baking tray, so then you could bake more muffins moving forward.
Wow. Now, Hillel, you grew up in Rochester. Your father was a doctor. Your mom was a social worker who later became a lawyer, and we can get into that. But what values defined your home life that you would be this kid in law school who was smart enough to like, and everybody's wondering how the hell did you get $107,000? So what were the values that defined your home life, and what led you to want to make money when you were a kid?
The main values were always hard work. I saw my father go to work every single day. He came from nothing. When I say nothing, he grew up very poor, New York City, one-bedroom apartment. When he was in his 20s, he was gifted his sister's bike that he got made fun of because it was a female bike. And he had his medical license before his driver's license because never could he even imagine being able to pay for a car. My mother's family, on the other hand, very, very successful, family. Everyone in that family did huge things. When I say huge things, one of my uncles was the first personal injury attorney to ever advertise on TV. I had other cousins that were, running, businesses for hundreds of millions of dollars. I had other relatives that owned professional sports teams. So it was almost kind of like rich dad, poor dad. And, they taught me at a young age that I could have anything I wanted in the entire world, but I had to make it on my own. So growing up, hard work was a huge, huge value in our family. Of course, also honesty, ethics, being nice to people, things of that nature.
But how did you deal with the fact that, your next door neighbors perhaps were getting freaking nice cars and everything they wanted, and you had to like go out and earn it on your own? Like, how did that affect you?
It was tough, and I had a hard time growing up with, with my parents because to me, I saw the norm was all my friends. They came from wealthy families. When they were 16, they got a, Jeep for the winter and a Mercedes for the summer. And when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, I was lucky if I could drive my dad's 15-year-old minivan, and I was just hoping it wouldn't break down, on the street. So, growing up, it was tough. It's funny. I always remember my dad saying that I told him once, Dad, I'm the only doctor's son without a car. But, looking back, I'm super happy because that made me who I am today. That gave me the drive, to be accomplished and make money.
Right. So you said your uncle was a lawyer and kind of your early inspiration. What did you see in him that shaped your path into the future?
He was a business owner, a lawyer by trade, but the law just happened to be his business. And he was one of the first personal injury attorneys to ever advertise on TV. So we're talking 30, 40 years ago. He really helped revolutionize the industry. And growing up, he was like a father to me. He was a mentor to me. Every vacation, I'd go visit him. Every summer, every vacation, I'd work in his law office. So from a very early age, if you would have asked me, at 8 years old, what I was going to be, I would have told you I was going to be an attorney because I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And, he really taught me a lot, the first half of my life and really learned a lot from him.
And then, you go to Syracuse to study entrepreneurship before it even became trendy. I don't even know if they had entrepreneurship when you first got there, but what did entrepreneur mean to you as an 18-year-old, and how did it shape your path in school?
Yeah, so growing up my whole life, in my mind, I was an entrepreneur, whether I was, 8 years old and working for a few dollars, and I would buy candy at the candy store and sell it to the rich kids on the bus for 10 times the price. I always loved watches. I would buy watches, high-end watches, enjoy them, and then sell them at a profit. And any business under the sun, I owned an inflatable 6,000 square foot laser tag arena that we paid someone to travel to all the fairs to.
Wait,
And
wait, 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 wait. I can go back. What was that business, and how'd you get into that?
So I actually bought it on eBay. I
Okay.
saw it was being sold for sale. It was $15,000, and it was a 6,000 square foot inflatable laser tag arena. It came
Where?
where it could be.
Where?
Well, I bought. I don't remember where I
In
bought it from.
Syracuse or?
I was in Syracuse at the time. I
Okay.
don't remember where I had it shipped in from. And it came with a cart that it would roll up to, and then it would go right into a trailer. And we would do private events. And then we saw that fairs were really a great source of income because we would attend a fair like the New York State Fair, whether it was in Syracuse or Buffalo or wherever it was. We'd set up, we'd pay an entry fee, and then every time a kid came in to play laser tag, it was this huge spaceship, 6,000 square feet. It would be $10 each. I didn't care. I was hammering stakes into the ground. I was, selling bottled water, because they were hot at the fair. And then ultimately we got someone to, travel around and do it for us. We learned, delegation.
And how do you reconcile with you have two boys, and on the one hand, your two boys could be grown up, pissed off that dad told them they had to work for everything, but it's that drive that you got that you had to go work for everything. How do you reconcile that with your two boys now?
Yeah, it's tough and it's not easy. Certainly, the life that we live now is not how I grew up. Now we live in a beautiful country club, and we have a lot of great things that we're thankful for. To me, I couldn't have even dreamed of that as a kid. To them, it's normal. So I can't be upset with them. I try my best to make sure that they're hardworking, that they're thankful, that they're appreciative, that they're nice kids. And it's not always easy. I came from, a Jewish background. My wife came from an Italian Catholic background. I came from a background where if I wanted a Diet Coke, I had to work for it. My wife came from a background where she was brought home in a Rolls Royce as a baby. So it's not easy. And, we're trying to find that, happy, equal medium, to raise good kids, who still want to work hard and are kind and appreciative.
Yeah, I listen to your story. You go to Nova Law School, you get an MBA, you're teaching business law while still a student. What were you trying to get ahead of, or were you trying to outrun something?
I think it's just that fire in the belly. And, it's crazy when we talk about it. It's not the kill, it's the journey, it's the hunt. I love starting things from scratch. I love doing things. I love moving the needle, and I love completing things. Obviously, when you complete something like, finishing a semester, becoming an attorney, making some money, it's great because that's the scorecard. It's told you, hey, you've done something well. But I love the hunt and I love the journey. To me, that's the most important part about it.
Got it. And I want to talk about, so, I went to Columbia Law, and I went to Greenberg in Miami, and I worked taking companies public. And one of the, we were working, taking Coral Gable Savings and Loan public. And the banker on the deal from Raymond James said, hey, anybody want any stock? And these stocks were opening at 10, coming out at 10 and opening at 18, 19, because they were coming out at 50% of book value. So I'm like, dude, I'll take 4,000 shares. So it opens at 19. I'm like 36,000. And my starting salary at Greenberg would have been 72. I'm like, wait a minute, I made 50% in one day, and they want me to work 3,000 hours to make the set. And then I came in, I was so happy the next day, and the Greenberg or the guy from Raymond James looking down at his shoes. I said, dude, you just made him money. He said, no, I talked to the lead partner, didn't think it was kosher. He made me cancel the trade. And at that minute, I said, law is a business, and there's easier ways to make money, but you were able to to take your entrepreneurial drive into law. If I had figured that out, maybe I would have stayed. But before getting into the story of how you really got started, I just want to know what drew you to asset protection. I never learned any of that in law school, and most lawyers say it's a niche that doesn't even exist. But what attracted you into like, hey, I'm going to be an asset protection?
Yeah, so growing up, because I was close with my uncle, who was the personal injury attorney, if you would have asked me, I probably would have said I was going to be a personal injury attorney. I never heard of asset protection in my entire life, like most people. When I was in law school, my parents and my uncle actually used an asset protection attorney for themselves to protect their assets. And that was the first time I ever heard about asset protection. But when I heard about it, I knew 110% that's what I wanted to do. And the reason I knew I wanted to do it was number one, it was the perfect marriage between business and law. Because doing asset protection, of course, you work with doctors and school teachers and professional athletes and celebrities, but the majority of the clients are the high net worth or really any business owner. So to me, it was the perfect marriage of business and law. And number two, I really felt like I was making a change and helping people. When I go to work every day, no matter what I'm doing, I always say to myself, I want to do three things. Number one, I want to help people. Number two, I want to have fun. And number three, I want to make money. And if I can do those three things, I'm happy. And I looked across the world and I said, in every city, there's hundreds of lawyers trying to find a way to take your money that you worked your entire life for, but maybe there's 5 or 10 guys in the entire country that help you protect it. So to me, I loved that I was making a difference, helping people. I mean, it's like, the school teacher, she works her whole life, 20, 30 plus years. She saves up. She has a couple $100,000 in the bank. Her son takes her car and gets in a car accident. Well, because the car is titled in her name, she gets sued and loses everything. So I thought it would be nice, instead of, trying to find a way to take money, to help people, keep it. And I always joke, I always say, I am the lawyer that hates lawyers.
That's funny. Well, you early on identified a guy named Arnold Goldstein, and at some point you went to him with a very creative offer to basically work for free. Tell us why you did that and what happened, and tell us about this relationship with Arnold.
Sure. So, when I decided and I knew for a fact I wanted to do asset protection, well, there's only two ways you get into asset protection. Number one is you educate yourself, and number two is you have a mentor. And being that it was such a niche and there was only 5 or 10 really big guys across the country, I didn't want to wait. So I first started by educating myself. I read anything and everything I could online. I bought any single book that I could read. And I just really educated myself as much as I could. While I was doing that, I tried to identify people that could mentor me. And I reached out to several of them. Most of them I didn't even hear back from. But Dr. Goldstein, he was the one who did asset protection for my parents and my uncle. And I was living in Fort Lauderdale at the time, and he was in Boca Raton. And, I scheduled a meeting with him, and he knew of me because he knew my parents and my uncle, but he didn't know me. And, I'll never forget, I looked on his website. He was wearing a blue suit and a red tie. So I put on a blue suit and a red tie. I figured the guy must like it, and I went in for my meeting. Again, he had no clue why I was coming. So I went into his office and we spoke for about an hour. We had a great conversation. And I said to him, I said, look, I want to work for you. And, he looked at me and pretty much said, look, I know you'll be great. He said, but you see that lawyer over there? And he pointed me to an office. He said, I just hired that lawyer and I can't step on his shoes. So I can't hire you right now. So I said to him, I didn't need the money. I had other businesses. I was making money, outside of law. So I said to him, I said, look, you don't need to pay me. How about this? Let me come work for you for free for 6 months. And if I'm not the best lawyer you've ever had, let's shake hands and go our separate ways.
Sounds like a great
So
offer.
I left happy as can be because in my mind, I was wrong. But in my mind, I thought I had a job. This was going to be like, if you wanted to play basketball, this was getting coached by Michael Jordan. So I left the office. I did all the right things. I sent him a handwritten thank you note that I FedExed to him. I followed up. And about a month later, he finally told me, I'm sorry, I can't hire you. And I said, what do you mean you can't hire me? I said, I'm working for free. And he said, listen, I know you'd be great, but again, I just hired this guy and I just can't step on his toes. So I said to myself, okay, he won't let me work for free. What am I going to do? When I came up with the idea, I said, listen, who better to invest in than yourself? I said, no problem. Here's what I'd like to do. He kicked me out the front door. I came in the back door. He kicked me out the back door. I dug a tunnel. And I said, Dr. Goldstein, I am going to hire you to be my asset protection attorney.
How old were you?
My low 20s. And I'll never forget the two things he said to me. He said, number one, you already know what you're doing, because I had spent a lot of time educating myself. And he said, number two, you don't have any assets to protect. And I said, I don't care. I'm going to hire you. So I wrote him a check and I hired him. And now I got to meet with him to learn and also build a relationship with him. Now, if you fast forward, back then, every year there was a seminar once a year, and I believe it was in Vegas at the time.
Okay.
I ended up taking over the seminar, and I would do it in Zurich, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. But when there was the seminar, I'll never forget, I called his secretary and I found out what flight he was on, what hotel he was staying at, and all the information. And I booked the same flight. I booked the same hotel. So I show up at the airport. He's getting a coffee. I'm getting a coffee. We take a ride to the hotel together. We're at the hotel. We have breakfast together. We have lunch together. We have dinner together. And we're there forming this relationship. And while we're there, we said, wait a minute. In the whole country, there's like 20 people who showed up at this conference. And that doesn't even mean they do what we do. Maybe 5 of them were big. And right then on the spot, we created the National Association of Asset Protection Attorneys. So then we had all these people joining our organization. I think he was the president and I was the vice president. So now we're back in Florida, and now I'm meeting with him, not just on my case, but on the organization. Now, this was probably a year and a half later from the first time I came in and said I will work for free. And I remember it like it's yesterday. He called me in for a meeting and I knew something was going on. And I knew something was going on because we met about once a month, and I just met with him the week before. And I drove up from Fort Lauderdale and he said, Hillel, there's a time in every man's career to go up, and there's a time in every man's career to go down. This is your time to go up and my time to go down. And I really, again, I was in my low 20s. I didn't really understand what he was even saying. And I asked him, I said, what do you mean? He said, it's a Hail Mary pass. It's a Hail Mary shot, but let's give it a try. I said, what do you mean? He said, I know you have a successful practice already in Fort Lauderdale. He said, come as little or as much as you want, but let's see what we could do together. And I said, I still don't understand what you mean. And I'll never forget this. He looked at me and he said, pretend you're on a cruise ship and the captain died. Here are the keys to my office. And that day he made me a 50-50 partner. So the guy that wouldn't allow me to work for free, the guy that I hired, the guy that I, followed, then made me a 50-50 partner. I closed the office in Fort Lauderdale. Of course, I finished all the cases. I bought my first piece of real estate in Boca Raton, and I started working full time with him. And it was amazing because, look, I had a successful practice on my own, but he had written 100 books. He had been practicing for 40 years. So I walked into a practice where now I was getting, 10 to 15 clients every day, real life experience, and you just can't buy that.
I want you to go back, and this tenacity that you had of someone saying no and you just keep going. It's so important for success. And how do you teach that to your own boys or to listeners that no just means a temporary no, but you got to just keep going?
Yeah. So, it's funny because they teach it to me. When I hear no, like you just said, does that mean no, not right now? Well, how about in 10 minutes? Oh, well, if not in 10 minutes, how about tomorrow? So, with that being said, I'll never forget, I was on a boat with another R360 member, and we're at the dock, and we were hanging on the back of the boat. It was like a father and son thing. And I was there with my 9-year-old Sebastian. And we saw come by Jamie Foxx, who's a very famous actor. I don't know Jamie, but we had some mutual friends. And his boat, who had a far different crowd than our boat, was parked a few boats down. And I'll never forget, Sebastian came up to me and said, Dad, I like his movies. I want to go talk to him. And I remember, wrongfully so, discouraging him, saying, well, Sebastian, let's not bother him, over and over. And over, Sebastian kept saying to me, no, Dad, the worst he can say is no. Let's go, let's go, let's go. After about 4 or 5 times, I said, what am I doing? Why am I getting in my son's way? He's right and I'm wrong. We went down to the boat. We saw one of Jamie's friends. He was just a few boats down. And we said, hey, my son's here. This is Sebastian. He's a very big fan of Jamie. Do you think that we can get a picture with Jamie? And the guy was very nice. He said, okay, let me talk to him and just ask him. And about 2 or 3 minutes later, the guy came back with Jamie. And I said, hey, Jamie, this is Sebastian. He loves your movies. Would you mind taking a picture? And Jamie looks at me, couldn't have been nicer. He said, a picture? He said, walk up the stairs and get on the boat. And me and Sebastian went on the boat, and he spent a lot of time with Sebastian, taking pictures, taking videos, talking about movies. And, I'm not afraid to say, I was wrong. Sebastian was right. But he was the one who told me, Dad, the worst he could say is no.
Wow, that's great. And going back to Goldstein, like what else did he teach you? Like obviously you spent a lot of time with him. He was like the number guy in the field. So what, like beyond law, if you think about life, loyalty, legacy, what other things did you learn from Arnold?
Oh, I mean, everything. There's probably, I could count them on my hand, maybe 5 guys or so that really have been mentors to me. He was like a father to me. We'd go boating every week, have brunch every week, dinner every week. I mean, super, super close. And he taught me a lot. He wasn't just an asset protection attorney. In fact, you probably remember this was before LegalZoom. He created a company called Easy Legal. So you used to be able to go to Office Depot or Staples and buy a one-page will or a one-page lease. So that was his company at 100 employees, working next to us at the law firm. So he was a business guy, one of the brightest minds I've met, but he was also a good person. He taught, business law, which got me into teaching business law. So it was all about giving back. He would donate, so I would team up with him and I would donate. And, he really just taught me about, being a good person and also, family and legacy. We would always talk about, when you're talking to financial advisors, Northern Trust might call you in one year and say, hey, we made you 7% on your money, and they give you a rubber chicken. And then, US Trust calls you in the next year and they say, hey, we made you 8%, and they give you a steak. And we would always say to each other, but what do you know about our families? What do you know about our wives? What do you know about our kids? So, it was far much more than just law and asset protection. It was law, it was business, it was life, it was family, it was, donating, it was teaching and giving back. Really just a great person and a bright mind.
And how long did the partnership between you guys last?
Yeah, so we were partners for years. Unfortunately, he passed away, and that's the only reason why we're still not partners today. But it lasted for a few years, and then obviously he was much older than me. He passed away.
And you stayed, and did you take over then the practice?
Yeah, so we owned the practice together, and we owned the publishing company together. So what I did is, I bought his 50% of the practice from the estate. I bought his 50% of the publishing company from the estate, and then I grew it from where it was, then to where it is now.
And when did you realize that you weren't just surviving in the field, but you were actually shaping it? Because you started writing books, you were speaking all over the country, and now, like, you became Arnold, really.
Yeah, I mean, look, we learned a lot from Arnold, and we wrote books together. But when I started getting contacted to go speak, 50, 100 times a year all across the country, and they wanted to pay me to do it, I said, okay, wow, this is nice. We helped rewrite some of the laws for one of the countries. So it really just slowly happened over time.
And I'm just curious, like, have you ever thought, like, obviously from like day one, you wanted to be a lawyer, but if you hadn't got into the law, what would you have done instead? Just curious.
It's funny you ask that question, because believe it or not, I do believe, and I don't say this in a bad way, I do believe that the law stunted my growth. Not that I'm upset where I am. I'm thankful. I'm grateful. But, I think that I had something inside of me that said, hey, because I always said I wanted to be a lawyer, because I went to law school, I think I felt when I got out of law school, I had to practice law. And, I've been successful, thank God. But I think if I didn't practice law and I just went into any business, I think I probably would have been 10 or 100 times more successful. So I love law. I have no regrets, but I do think if I went into just business versus the business of law, I do think I probably would have been more successful. But again, I try and make law a business in the sense that forget the asset protection firm, which is my baby. I buy and sell law firms. My smallest law firm I bought was, they had one, two, three people. The largest one I bought had about 80 people. And I'll never forget the conversation I had with a friend of mine, very successful billionaire. I was on his dock one day and I was just talking, and he's much, much older than me. And I just said to him, I said, jokingly, I said, hey, I'm in the wrong business. And he looked at me and he said, Hillel, you're not in the wrong business. He said, because you're in the business of asset protection and because you meet all these high net worth individuals, you will get into business with some of your clients. And I'll never forget that conversation I had with him. And that's been true.
And tell me, I know that at some point you were like a nightclub king or something. You like, is that one of the businesses that you got into, nightclubs in Miami?
Yeah, so I've been in any business you could probably imagine, but I had about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 professional athlete, NFL and NBA clients. They owned one of the biggest nightclubs in South Beach. They had invested, I don't know, over $5 million and they lost every penny. I was always good at going into businesses, especially that had, significant gross revenues coming in and doing turnarounds. So I went to them and I said, look, guys, you've lost 5, 10 million bucks, whatever the number is. I said, you're getting ready to close it down. Here's what we'll do. I'll write you a check. That way you guys get money up front. And I said, I will give you a check every single week. I'll give you X percent of the admissions, X percent of the liquor sales, X percent of the valet. So you can't lose because every week you're going to get a guaranteed check. And they took my deal and I went down and I took over the club. And, it was very successful. We made a lot of money. They made a lot of money. It was funny because I'd be in the law office Monday through Thursday. Friday after work, I would drive down to South Beach. I'd have a nice dinner. And we didn't even open up until midnight. And we would make all of our money only on Friday night between the hours of midnight and 6. We tried everything else. We tried to open up during the week and do a comedy night. Failed. We tried to open up during the week and do an MMA cage fighting at the club. Failed. For whatever reason, the only thing that was successful was Friday night. But it was so great, it carried the entire business. So we did very well after about a year or two. It was tough with the commute. I was engaged to Ashley, and I ended up selling the club back to the athletes. And, this was so long ago. I don't even think it exists. I think it's a parking garage now in Miami.
Wow.
They knocked it down and built the parking garage, but it was fun.
But people are probably listening to you and wondering, but wait a minute, how could you, because, most people like work all their life. How could you be like running an asset protection firm, but yet also running like a nightclub?
Like all of my businesses, find the right people and get the heck out of their way. So for the nightclub, I found the right partner and put in the right managers. When I buy and sell law firms, I'll insert staff, COOs, things of that nature. But really, it's all just about finding the right people and delegating. Of course, I'm the visionary. I come up with the goals, the long-term objectives, the hard decisions. But, I don't get into the day-to-day running of the businesses.
Well, that's an important point. I mean, you see things, you're process-oriented, and hire the right people and put them into place. Could you do like a 5-7 minute masterclass on own nothing, control everything? So obviously people can buy your books, but what's like the basic core thing that people need to do in order to protect their assets that have assets?
Sure. So I think I'll start just by laying a little bit of a foundation for a minute or two of what asset protection is and why it's so important and, why insurance isn't enough. And also the differences between asset protection and estate planning. And then I'm happy to go into some techniques. First of all, the differences between asset protection and estate planning, very easy. Asset protection deals with life. Estate planning deals with death. So with asset protection planning, we want to make it so difficult, so expensive, if not impossible, for anybody to collect against you that they don't want to sue you in the first place. You don't want to be the low hanging fruit. We want to take the chips off the table and make somebody uncollectible and judgment proof. So asset protection planning deals with, while you're alive, how do you protect what you worked so hard for? Estate planning, on the other hand, deals with death. Nothing while you're alive. Estate planning deals with, when I die, how do I make sure that the assets go where I want them to go, quickly, privately, less taxes and less lawyer fees? And I always tell people asset protection planning comes first, because if you don't protect what you have nothing to pass on from an estate planning point of view.
Right. And if you don't do the estate planning well, you could literally 50 cents on every dollar could go to the government and lawyers. And that's what most lawyers are doing. But tell us now about this. You know, people get sued all the time for stupid things.
Yeah, there's 100 million lawsuits every single year. That number's only growing. There's a 1 in 4 chance you and your business will be sued over the next 12 months. The average business and person is sued 5 times over their lifetime. There's a 50% chance of divorce. I joke and say in South Florida, there's a 99.9% chance of divorce. And a lawsuit can cost you tons of money, even if you win the case. And probably the craziest stat I saw recently was, you are 7 times more likely to face a lawsuit than get into a car accident. So it's really not a if, it's more of a when. And people think, well, that's why I have insurance. Insurance is great. I tell people to buy it. It's cheap. It helps you sleep at night. But insurance companies are the most profitable industries in the world. And that's because the majority of lawsuits aren't covered by insurance. I remember I had a case where someone got sick at one of the houses that I rented out. They claimed mold. I had over a $10 million policy, and they pointed me to the 4-point font where mold was excluded in Florida. So, unfortunately, we just live in a very frivolous, litigation savvy society where lawsuits are literally the biggest business.
What are techniques in a nutshell? How can you simplify one smart technique to make it more difficult and to defeat these kind of frivolous lawsuits?
So one of my favorite strategies is to use protective entities. And protective entities are things that you've heard of, like LLCs, limited partnerships, trusts, things of that nature. And to me, it's the neatest thing in the world. So, just like you and I are different people with different social security numbers, if I get sued, they can't come after you and vice versa. You and your protective entity are different people. You have a social security number. Your protective entity has a tax ID number. You're looked at as 2 totally separate living individuals. So for example, if you have a piece of real estate, let's call it a rental in your name, well, if you get sued, you can lose that rental. And maybe even worse than that, if somebody gets injured on the rental, they can sue you and come after everything. All the real estate you own, the money you own, your businesses. If instead we take that rental and put it in an LLC, now if you get sued, it's not your rental to lose. So they can't take the rental. If we take that rental and put it in an LLC, now if somebody gets injured on the property, they can only sue the LLC and they can't sue you. So it's literally the difference between keeping your property and losing your property and getting sued and not being sued. No difference with money. If you have a brokerage account, well, if you get sued, you can lose all your checking, savings, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, brokerage accounts. But if instead you take that brokerage account, let's say your stocks and bonds, and you put it into a protective entity like a limited partnership, well, now if you get sued, it's not yours to lose. So there's things you can do that by retitling your assets and putting them in protective entities, you can essentially own nothing but control everything. You have full use of all your assets. You can bank anywhere you want to bank. You can use any financial advisor you want. You don't pay more or less in taxes. You don't need to sell your assets, but by simply retitling them to protective entities, you can literally keep everything by owning nothing and controlling everything.
So Joe Smith and his wife have their brokerage account at wherever, and now you create a limited partnership, ABC limited partnership. You then sweep all your money into there. And instead of your name and your wife's name, it's this limited partnership. Tell me why exactly legally, without getting into a lot of legalese, why the limited partnership protects you.
Sure. And understand the limited partnership is just one example. We
Right.
don't always use a limited partnership. We use different business entities. But in that specific case, we would pick a jurisdiction where the limited partnerships have what are called charging order protection. And what charging order protection means in simple terms is it means if you get sued and you own interest in a limited partnership, nobody can go in and take your interest. So if you have $5 million in your name and you get sued, you lose the $5 million very quickly. But if you take the $5 million in investments and put it in the limited partnership, if you get sued, you now have no 5 million to lose because you don't own it. The limited partnership owns it, and nobody can reach in and take your ownership interest in the limited partnership due to the law, which is called charging order protection.
And why does that charging order protection give you that? What have the courts said? Like, break it down.
Yeah, so what the court states is that these are laws that say if you're a creditor and you get a judgment against John Smith, if their money's in a charging order protective limited partnership like we're talking about, the law specifically states that you cannot reach in and interfere with the business, take any money, you can do nothing. The only thing you can do is sit there and wait to see if the person who you beat in a lawsuit takes a distribution. Now, obviously, the person's never going to take a
And what's
distribution.
the rationale? Like, you're the judges of the court. They don't do things that aren't rational. So what's the rationale?
The rationale is essentially they don't want some third party to be able to, reach in and interfere with the business. That wouldn't be fair to you. That wouldn't be fair to the business. That wouldn't be fair to the partners. So what the law says is, look, if the guy takes a distribution, okay, takes 100,000 out, well, now it's fair game because it's not interfering with the business. Now it's just John Smith's $100,000. But because those laws exist, John Smith would never take the distribution, which allows us to negotiate the case because we can say to them, you'll never get paid. Hey, look, we'll settle for 5 cents or 10 cents on the dollar.
Right. And then you're also like, lawyers are really smart, the personal injury lawyers. So they aren't going to spend a lot of money on a case that they know they can't win. So the minute they find out that these assets are protected, you're no longer low hanging fruit, right? So,
Yeah, look, lawyers are lazy. They want the easy cases, they want the settlements. In most cases, there's a doubt as to liability. Who's going to win the case, right? And I'm going to say, I'm going to win the case. You're going to say, you're going to win the case. But what we do with asset protection planning is we create a doubt as to collectability. So what we're able to say is, we're able to say, look, we think you were going to win. You think you're going to win. But even if you do win, our client is uncollectible and judgment proof, so you cannot collect against them. And I just helped settle a $20 million lawsuit for $250,000. I've settled a $5 million judgment for $500,000. And we were only able to do that because we were able to convince the other side that you're never going to collect. So let's work something out, or you end up getting nothing.
last question on this subject. I remember learning in law school something called fraudulent transfer, that if you think you're going to get sued, or maybe you are being sued, you can't then transfer your assets so that they can't touch them. Like, how does that affect, like, if somebody comes to you, I don't know, they're a doctor and they said, I just got sued, can you help me? How does that affect everything?
Well, of course, the lawyer's favorite answer is it depends. Um, but a fraudulent transfer essentially deals with transferring assets out of your name when you have a present or potential creditor, and as a result, the creditor doesn't get paid. Now, in most states, it's a civil issue. It's not a criminal issue. So I'll give you an example with Florida. In Florida, if someone's suing you, it's still your money. You can do whatever you want. In fact, there's a case that says you don't have to stand there like a deer in headlights. So if a client walks into my office and they're a Florida resident and they're being sued, we can still do all the asset protection planning we want. Now, with that being said, if you fast forward years later, if the client loses the lawsuit, Then the person suing them can sit them down for a deposition under oath, have them fill out a financial affidavit. And if they find out that they cannot collect against the people because they've moved their assets, at that point, the creditor can file an entirely new lawsuit, which is called a fraudulent transfer lawsuit. But understand now it's a brand new lawsuit, a lot more money, takes a lot more time. And the only remedy that that creditor has is if they win that new fraudulent transfer lawsuit, they can unwind the transfer and try and take the asset. So the way it works is even if you're being sued, you can still protect your assets in most states. However, the creditor may have a remedy to unwind the transfer. Now, here's the interesting thing. Very rarely, not never, but very rarely do I ever see a fraudulent transfer lawsuit. I'd say it happens probably less than 5% of the time. So although it's a potential and a possibility, it never really ends up becoming a probability. So again, as long as there's no judgment against you, there's still a lot of things that you can do to protect yourself. Now, if there's a judgment against you, all chips are off the table because at that point, the money's
Right.
truly not yours. It's owed to somebody else.
Right. That's a whole different story. So if somebody wanted to dive deeper into this, what of your many books would you recommend that they buy to like go deeper on this?
Yeah, so the two main books are Financial Self-Defense and Asset Protection Secrets. If somebody really loves this, they want to spend a few hours reading a book, I think they'll get more out of Financial Self-Defense. With that being said, I wrote Asset Protection Secrets, because we're all busy. And Asset Protection Secrets is all Q&A. So literally in 2 minutes, they can flip to any chapter and they can say, hey, how do I protect my home? So if they have the time, Financial Self-Defense. If they're busy like most of the world, Q&A, Asset Protection Secrets.
You've said that for every 60 seconds you make money, spend 60 seconds protecting it. But what's something that you've protected in your own life that had nothing to do with money?
I think, protection comes in a lot of different ways, right? We can protect our assets. We can protect our kids. We could protect our reputation. And it goes on and on and on. And I've tried to protect everything. Being in asset protection, for right or wrong, you're constantly thinking, how do you protect anything and everything? So I'm always looking for ways to protect my kids, to protect my health, to protect reputation, but really anything. I'm very conservative. And to me, and I don't mean this just in a financial way, it's not what you make, it's what you keep.
And what's a moment that you've lost something, like, I don't know, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, that no asset structure could have saved that taught you a valuable lesson?
We lose things all the time. And, I'm a very, very passionate person. I'm more of an all or nothing type of guy. So, my emotions go up, my emotions go down. And, there's been times where, of course, events have happened. I've been sad. My partner, as you said, Dr. Goldstein passed away. My mother passed away at a very early age. So I've lost a lot in my life. I try my best, obviously not always at the time, to say, hey, how do you make lemonade out of lemons? What is the lesson I can learn from this failure or from this loss?
And given your reputation, you have a lot of celebrity clients, athletes you mentioned. I've seen pictures on your social media with Damon John from Shark Tank. What have you learned from some of the smartest people that you hang out with that are just achieved at a super high level?
I mean, everything comes down to relationships. I know you've heard it said before. This is not my quote, so I don't want to take any credit from it. But something that I heard actually another R360 member say is your network is your net worth. And I think anything and everything comes down to relationships. All things being equal, people want to do business with people they like. All things not being equal, people still want to do business with people they like. And I'm quoting a very famous author who I'm a very good friend with. His name is Jeffrey Gitomer. He wrote one of the best all-time selling sales book, The Little Red Book of Selling or Sales. He was the only person chosen to rewrite Dale Carnegie's sales information. And I took him from just an author to becoming one of my best friends. And he would say things like, make a sale, make a commission, make a friend, make a fortune. And I think those things today, more than ever, are so important. It's not about the business, it's not about the product or service you have. It's about the relationships you build.
You said this day and age, which I assume you're talking about, people are just social media, artificial intelligence. You make a special effort to connect with people. When you were trying to develop a relationship with the mentor you finally had, you mentioned that you sent a FedExed handwritten letter. Nobody gets like handwritten letters anymore. Why is that so important? And the other thing I think you were telling me once about Gittimer is that you would try to dream up like what would be the most amazing custom gift for this particular person that would arrive with that handwritten letter that would be like a wow. Like, why
Yeah.
is that important? Give us some examples of things that you've done that have impacted people.
I just think, everything's lost these days in social media and, online. A kid spends hundreds of thousands of dollars going to school, and then when it's time to get a job, they send you an email. Well, emails get lost, everyone else sends an email. How do you stand out? So when I go talk, at the universities and I'm talking to people, what I tell them is, look, go to FedEx, go to Kinko's, and go get, 30 resumes printed. Okay, get them printed on thick paper, get them bound in a spiral, put a clear plastic page over it. It's going to cost you, a couple bucks to do that. So maybe it costs you $100, if that, to get 20 of them. I said, you just spent hundreds of thousands on your education. Why not spend $100 on your presentation? And, the people that are hiring you, the way they look at it is the way somebody does anything is how they do everything. And how you present yourself to the person that you want to hire you is probably how you're going to present yourself to the clients of that person and the people that you're working for. So I always tell people, spend time, put together a really good resume, and then go to the office where you want to work. And I would go up to the secretary and I would say, hi, let's say, my name is John Smith, and I'd really love to work for, this professional hockey team. Is the hiring manager or the owner around? And you know what the secretary is going to say? The secretary is going to say, oh, thank you so much. Please give me your resume, and I'll give it to him. And I would say, with all due respect, I truly appreciate that. But if it's okay with you, I would just like to sit here in the lobby. I don't care if it takes 5 hours. If that person has a 10-second break, I would just like to hand it to them personally and shake their hand. Well, the secretary is going to probably be a little pissed off, but she's going to tell that person, hey, there's this guy. He won't leave, and he just wants to hand you his resume personally. And at some point, that guy has to use the bathroom. He has to get up, and he's going to come in, and I would look him in the eyes and I would say, hi, my name is John Smith, and I would love to come work for your professional hockey team. I know I can add value. I will do anything and everything you want. I will sweep the floors. I will wash the windows. I want to prove to you. And I would shake his hand. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be guaranteed a job, but you're probably going to be guaranteed an interview. So you need to do things to stand out. And I went to a prep school, a boarding school. I'll never forget their slogan. It was a basket of red apples with one green apple. And it said, in a world that teaches you to fit in, we teach you to stand out. So don't be the one of 1,000 people that sends your resume. Go knock on the door. Get your foot in the door. And don't worry how much they pay you. People are so worried about, well, how much am I going to get paid? It doesn't matter. Because if somebody comes in and they work for me for free, well, if they're the best employee and team member, if I don't give them a big salary, I'm going to lose them. And on the other hand, if somebody comes in and I give them a huge salary up front, in a week or two, if they're terrible, they're out the door. So I always tell people, you spend a fortune on your education, spend a tiny a bit of money, pennies, on presenting yourself, and go and meet people. And look, 1 out of 10 people may think you're too aggressive and you may turn them off. That's okay. You only need one person. My dad used to tell me the story how he'd see this guy in New York City saying, get your apple, $1 million, get your apple, $1 million. And my dad went up to him and said, an apple, $1 million? And the guy looked at him and said, I only need to sell one.
That is so good. So, my story around that, they canceled my trade in the stock market. And I was a military background. I didn't know anything about the stock market. So I go back to Columbia Law and I start like really getting into numbers. I'm really good with numbers and I start trading options. And I remember I bought these Motorola options. I basically made like $300,000 trading while I was in law school, on a computer. And I'm like, damn, I'm going to go 72,000 a year for 3,000 hours in here. So I read this book by Jack Schwager called Market Wizards, and it had like the 10 best traders. And there was one guy who went to Columbia Business School. He was a U.S. Marine, like in '68, and he was a Jewish kid who became a Marine. And now he trades on his own. And he got so bored winning the stock trading competition for 7 years in a row that he left. And he was trading in Boca Raton. And that's where I wanted to go because my in-laws lived there. So, but he was a really grouchy, cranky kind of guy. And he was a lone wolf. So I did the same thing that you did. 21 days I was sitting, and he had a different way he could get out. But the guy, after 21 days of me sitting there from 9 in the morning to 5, he finally took me out to lunch, and then we started a partnership together. I found that I didn't have the stomach to do the type of trading that he did, but he wrote a book and I helped him with that, and I ended up going in a different direction. But that tenacity, what do you think of like this generation? Like, they won't even pick up the phone and call you on a cell phone. They'll send you a text like, hello?
Yeah, and same thing. Like my dad, when he was going to medical school, my dad applied to every single medical school. He was going to apply to a few, and my mom was like, "No, you are applying to every medical school in the entire country." You know how many he got in?
None. Oh,
One.
Wow.
You know what they call the doctor who only gets into one school, even if they finish last in their class? They still call him a doctor.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful.
But
You just got to keep trying.
yeah, and you asked me a great question that I think is important about, how do you stand out? And I think it's so important because if you can become memorable, you can become unforgettable. And I'll tell you, two stories of things that I've done.
Yeah.
One with Jeffrey Gittimore. So, Jeffrey and I formed this great relationship. We became the best of friends. I'd go see him in North Carolina and stay at his house.
For people that haven't heard that name, can you just expand a little who this guy is?
Yeah. Jeffrey Gittimore is a living legend. He wrote The Little Red Book of Sales or Selling, one of the most popular sales books ever. He's continued that with the Little Yellow Book of Yes Attitude, the Little Black Book of Connections. If you go to any Barnes and Nobles or any bookstore that exists, if you go to sales, you'll see 20 of his books. He rewrote Dale Carnegie's, all of his sales books. Just one of the most brilliant minds in the world, and authors when it comes to selling.
And what's the difference in age with you?
Oh, he's much older. I'm 43, and Jeffrey's got to be, I'm just guessing, in his 70s. And I apologize if I'm wrong on the age,
but that's another issue where young people sometimes feel, oh, they're too old or they're unapproachable. But you have obviously found different.
I'll tell you how I became friends with Jeffrey. I was in a car with my buddy, and we were listening to someone being interviewed, and I loved it. I said, "Oh my God, this guy gets it." So I was on my way to the Boca Raton Resort. When I got to the Boca Raton Resort, I Googled it, and it turned out to be Jeffrey. Now, I didn't know Jeffrey's name, but I had read his other book, The Little Red Book of Selling. So then I put two to two together. So I said, I got to call this guy. Maybe I'll hire him. I don't even know if I can hire him, but let me call him. So, create your own luck. So I call him, and I try and be as nice as I can to everyone. His receptionist answers the phone. I start talking to the receptionist. I tell her I live in Boca. She's like, "Oh, my sister lives in Boca. This, and that." It turned out the receptionist was Jeffrey's daughter.
Oh,
and
wow.
I ended up becoming friends with her. I ended up becoming friends with the daughter that lived in Boca. I helped her with a few issues, and then I ended up becoming really good friends with Jeffrey. And I wanted to do something for Jeffrey to thank him for, things that he had done for me. So I wrote him a really nice letter about how he was a mentor to me and things of that nature. And I knew one of his idols, was Steve Jobs. So what I did was I actually went online. I think I found it on eBay, and I found, from a reputable source, all certified and everything, a Steve Jobs original business card from like 30 years ago. It was his business card that he had given to someone. So I had it framed for him, and I wrote him a beautiful message. Hey, just like Steve Jobs was a mentor of yours, you're a mentor of mine. Well, I sent that to Jeffrey, and he put it on his desk. And I didn't ask him to do anything, but Jeffrey created an entire YouTube video about it. He talks about how, his good friend, Hillel Presser, the asset protection attorney, sent him that for his birthday, and it's on his desk. And every day he looks at it, he thinks of me. Now, that video that Jeffrey put out on YouTube, I don't know how many tens of thousands of views it got, but it wasn't that it was so expensive. It was the thought.
You were doing it genuinely as an expression of kindness for what he did to you, not thinking that you were going to get anything out of this, right?
Never in my mind could I have thought that he was going to do a whole video about it. He was a very special person and still is to me. I wanted to thank him. That was a gift to him. Never in my mind did it cross my mind to say, oh, he's going to make a video about this. It was a pleasant surprise, but never was that an intention. The thought didn't even enter my mind. There was another gentleman, and he was a very, very large player in the spirit industry, and it was going on a crazy trip with him. I was close with him and his kids, and they took us on just this amazing trip. And I'm like, okay, what do you get the billionaire that has everything? So, it was easy to buy a gift for the wife, right? Because you could buy her a nice bag or something like that. But what do you get the guy? So what I did was I contacted Pappy Van Winkle, and I emailed and called until it's a very small company, until I got in touch with one of the family members, and I told him the situation. And I bought a bottle of Pappy for the person, but I had the person from Pappy write a letter that said, from one connoisseur to another, enjoy the Pappy. So again, it's not that this was, the largest financial gift in the world. It was the thoughtfulness behind it.
So the lesson is when people do nice things for you, thank them genuinely. If you have an interview, you write a follow-up email thanking somebody for their time, even if you don't ultimately get the job. All those things are appreciated, and you never know, right?
Yeah. My theory is you can never thank people enough. I just went on one of the most incredible trips, that I've been on. And, a friend of ours invited us, and, we paid for the trip. I mean, it wasn't that we went for free, but they put so much hard work and effort into this trip. They've been so kind to us. They've introduced us to so many great people. I got back late Tuesday night. Today's Friday. I sent both the husband and wife just a very, very nice thank you note. It was an audio note, but just letting them know that, I'm thankful. I'm appreciated. I value our friendship. To me, my motto is you can never thank somebody enough. If you want to call me annoying because I thank you too much, that's okay. But if I'm going to someone's house, we're showing up with a gift. And if we're not, for some reason, we're sending something. And if we go 4 times, we're sending 4 things. And you'll probably say, why do these people keep sending us something? But it's the right thing to do.
So it's like almost a value of like gratitude. You have a lot of gratitude for people that do nice things for you, and you thank them. So
look, you got to be thankful. You got to be grateful. The world is, what you make of it. What's being positive.
I want to shift gears in that in R360, we believe that if you're a strategic wealth creator, we have an award-winning filmmaker, and we make a film of somebody's life. In the first 3 years of the journey, it's kind of how they made their wealth, but more importantly, how do you talk to your great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren you're ever going to meet, and how you pass on your values. You've gone through that experience. What was it like for you, your kids, your wife, and when you look at it now, what really still gives you a chuckle about it?
First of all, it was such an incredible experience. I can't even say that enough. And Sylvia and the entire team, I mean, the things they do were incredible. I'll give you a few examples. I live in Florida most of the year. My father's still in upstate New York. So Sylvia and the team went to upstate New York. Now, they didn't just go there and interview my father. They went by my old house that we don't own anymore. They went by the cemetery where my mother is buried. They went to my high school where I went. They even went to the kind of the gathering area, where the kids would hang out and get together.
They went to like a grocery store that you used to like
Yeah,
also
yeah,
or
they went to
something?
the best grocery store in the area. I mean, they went so far above and beyond. It's not like just, first of all, just flying somewhere for an interview is a big deal, but to do that was incredible. And then, of course, they also flew down here. They came to my home in Boca. We went out on our boat in Miami. So the amount of time and love that they put into those films is incredible. And I just think it's one of the most special things, really, that I've ever done in my life. To have a video where your great, great, great grandchildren that you'll never meet can know, hey, yeah, how did you earn your wealth? Okay, that's a small part about it. But what's important to you? What's important to the family? What are the values? And to be able to share that, it's been so special. And it's such a great thing to do before the stories are lost, because my mother passed away at a very early age. So if I didn't get this information from my father, all of his stories and all of her stories would be lost. But now that they'll be captured, we have them for generation to generation. And we did the same thing with my lovely wife, Ashley. Her parents, they interviewed her parents to get their story. So really, really special, something that we'll cherish and, keep within the family forever.
And how do the idea is the first 3 years, it's going to be that story. And the second uh, 3 years, there's going to be a 15-minute segment done that'll be attached. That is, how are you using your wealth, your influence to better humanity, your community, your country, the world? And I know that you've supported Jewish causes, spoken out against anti-Semitism and other things. What will that part of the film look like in terms of how you give back?
So it's interesting because to me, the most important part in that is not even the giving back. I mean, that's a big part, but it's the children at an older age and what they realize about giving back. So, right now I have two boys. Sebastian's 9, Nicholas is 4. I don't remember the ages, but we did the video a few years ago. So, Nicholas might have been, I'm going to guess, 2 or so at the time. Well, he's a totally different person than he was back then. Sebastian, he's similar to how he was, and he's fantastic. But I think really it's going to see how they see things changing and helping people out. It's what can we teach them about donating, giving back. And when I say donating, giving back, that doesn't only mean money. There's, of course, causes that we love to, participate in. From everything. I like things with kids and children, whether it's from a health perspective or whether it's from an educational perspective. But it's also about time. How can you mentor people? How can you help people? And hopefully, what we do, my wife and I, hopefully those values are instilled on our 2 children and they'll want to do those things as well.
I was on the National Board of Junior Achievement, which teaches kids in school how to be entrepreneurs, financial literacy. But we've done a lot of studies where like 10% of the population have like this entrepreneurship gene. Not everybody has it. But you and I went to lunch once in Boca, and you brought Sebastian, and we were having lunch, and you start just asking him questions, and he was just responding back so quickly. What were those questions? What did he respond, and what were you trying to teach him? I think he was probably only like 7 years old back then.
Yeah, so, look, I try and have Sebastian do as much as he can. Of course, he's got a big schedule with school and sports and stuff like that. But, anything, whether it's making sure you pick up all the dirty clothes and put them in the laundry, taking the trash and the recycling bin out. I don't care what it is, but I want him to learn that you have to help out and have to do things. Right now, we're talking about starting a real business together, but I don't care how little or how small it is. And if you ask Sebastian, hey, Sebastian, if you get your allowance, let's just say you get $3, I'm just making it up, what happens to those $3? Sebastian will tell you, Dad, the first dollar goes back to you. And you'll say, why does it go back to your dad? He just gave you the $3. And he'll say, because the first dollar has to go towards paying expenses. So I give it back to my dad because he makes sure I have food and shelter over my head. And Sebastian will say, well, the second dollar goes for me to invest, whatever that investment may mean. Maybe it's a business he's creating, maybe it's stocks, any type of investment. And then number three, where does the third dollar go? Well, he'll say, Dad, that's for me to do whatever I want with. So first dollar goes to expenses, second to investment, third to do whatever he wants. And if you ask him, well, what may you want to invest your money in? He'll tell you, Dad, I probably want to buy a building. I want to buy some real estate. And if you ask him, well, why do you want to buy real estate? He'll say, Dad, because, you rent it out and then people pay you. And then I'll say, okay, well, what do you do with the money when people pay you? And he'll say, I buy another building.
That's
So,
great. And that started that conversation was like at 7, and he was like spitting things back like machine gun.
yeah.
And so obviously when he grows up, he's going to have an awareness of money, saving more than you spend, and he's going to have these values. Now, you also invest a lot in real estate. You own all kinds of buildings all over the place, and you do it yourself. And I'm sure you've taken him with you. And why has that for you been a wealth creator aside from the law firms and all the little ancillary businesses?
Yeah, so I love real estate. I mean, look, if you look at the Forbes 400 list, right? I mean, a lot of people, if not the majority, have made a lot of wealth through real estate. So I love real estate. Also, obviously, from a tax point of view, there could be depreciation, appreciation of the asset. It's a hedge against inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I love real estate. I try and buy as much as I can, but I look at myself as more of a mom and pop person as opposed to someone who's focused, all in self-storage or someone who builds brand new buildings. Me, I don't care. I buy anything that I know I can rent out. So I don't care if it's a 40,000 square foot strip center. I don't care if it's a 1-bedroom condo. Earlier this year, I bought 2 CVSs. I just care, can I rent it out and can I produce income? And I try and get my son into that as well. So today's Friday, tomorrow's Saturday. So I said to Sebastian tomorrow, Sebastian, I have a haircut at 8 o'clock and then I'm going to see a building at 9:30. Would you like to come with me? And he says yes. So I try my best to, without forcing it on him, bring him. And of course, once Nicholas gets a little bit older, I'll hopefully do the same thing with him as well.
That makes sense. And then you've been involved in peer-to-peer organizations, now R360. How have they contributed to you being successful? And what would you recommend to others on like just peer-to-peer experiences?
Yeah, so I've always loved peer-to-peer groups. I've been in almost every one that, people can think of, and I've gotten value out of every one. To me, when it comes to a peer-to-peer group, what I'm looking for is, number one, what can I learn from other people? You're sitting in a room with, very, very successful, smart people own in their own industry or specific area of expertise, but hey, what can I learn? Also, I'm looking for like-minded people. What are the relationships? What are the friendships that can come from that? And lastly, and not in any special order, I'm looking at what can I give back? So, I'm very knowledgeable in, X, Y, and Z specific areas. How can I help others? So to me, the 3 things for the peer-to-peer group that I always look for is, how do I make friends? Some of my best friends have been made through peer-to-peer groups. How can I give back to others? How can I use the knowledge that I have in whatever area that is, asset protection or anything, and help other people? And then lastly, what can I learn from other people, even if it has nothing to do with my situation, that I can apply to my own life? And, I've just gained so much from that.
Now, you've also had, I had Mark Moses on, also on Fortunate Fishes. He has a big coaching business. I've hired his coaches. You've hired his coaches. Why is that important for people to be successful as well?
Yeah, so number one, there's always things you can learn. Learning never ends. We'll talk about my mother going to law school maybe in a little bit, but you can never stop learning. So I don't care how successful you think you are or how great you think you are, the learning doesn't stop. That's number one. Number two is accountability is huge. You need someone no different than going to the gym, no different than a basketball coach. But you need, whether it's a business coach, a life coach, you need people that can hold you accountable. And I've learned, Mark has a great, great business, and I've learned so much for his coaches. I take so much of it in my everyday life. One of the things I learned from them that I always say, I don't know how many times a day, is who will do what by when and hold people accountable. That's one of 100 different great things I've learned from Mark's company, but it's just taught me so much, holds me accountable, and really helps you strive and achieve to become the best person that you can.
Right. And you mentioned your mom, and you lost your mom at an early age to Alzheimer's. But tell us a little bit about her lifelong learning and how that affected you.
It's a funny story. So, my mother always loved to learn, as you talked earlier, social worker, therapist, that type of thing. She was a stay-at-home mom. She didn't work, but she loved to learn. And I'll never forget, she knew I wanted to go to law school. So she said, you know what? I'm going to apply to law schools, not because I want to go, but I want to see what the process is for my son. So my mother applies to law schools,
At the
and
age of what?
she at that point was probably in her 40s or
Yeah.
50. Okay. And she gets into law school in Florida. Now, we lived in upstate New York in Rochester. And all of a sudden, she starts telling my dad, I think I want to go to law school. My dad is like, are you kidding me? We live in upstate New York. You got into Florida law school, and now you're saying you want to go? I thought you were doing this just for Hillel. Well, thank God for my dad. My mom also got in to Syracuse University Law School. So my dad said, okay, at least that's only about an hour away. So my mom ended up going to law school in her 50s. They got a place in Syracuse, and my dad arranged his work schedule so he could see her every single day. So I was a senior at Syracuse University undergrad. My mother was a freshman at Syracuse University Law School, and we would meet for lunch. We would go to the basketball games, but that's not the funny thing. The funny thing is that my mother, who was in her 50s, also decided to take along my great aunt. And my great aunt went with my mother to Syracuse Law School, who was in her 80s, and
So
she was
she
the
got in
oldest.
also?
She got in also and was the oldest person ever to graduate from law school. And they wrote a book on her called Grandma Goes to Law School.
Jeez. And your mother and your grandmother the same time with you.
My mother and great aunt.
And great aunt. Wow.
Yep.
Wow. That reminds me of Douglas MacArthur goes to West Point.
Yep.
And his mother gets at Thayer Hotel a room, gets all the books that her son is gonna and is on top of them.
Yeah.
He graduates, of course, number one in his class, but everybody forgets that his mother had moved in like for 4 years, which is kind of the craziest story.
So whenever anyone says anything, I say it's never too late to do anything.
Yeah, no, you're right. Now, I heard a story once from you that when you were having a hard day at work, you would leave, go into your car, and watch a YouTube video. Tell us about the video and why and what you learned from it and what people can learn from it also.
Yeah, so the video that you're talking about is by a gentleman named Jesse Itzler, fantastic speaker, probably one of the best I've heard. And the video that I'm referring to, he probably has hundreds, is that the words you speak matter. And it's about a 7 or 8 minute video. And it just talks about, what your mindset is, what you speak, that's what's going to happen. I mean, we get up in the morning and we have a choice. We can have a good day or a great day. I won't even say a bad day or a good day. I say a good day or a great day. And we get up in the morning and we can say, hey, look, our cup could be half full or it's half empty. And there's no reality to that. The only reality that you're limited to is your mind. And sometimes you need to be reminded of that. I mean, look, I have my hurdles. I have issues and stresses just like everyone else. And if I can get through them, I get through them. If I'm having a really tough day, I go rewatch this video. I've probably watched it over 100 times. I've probably sent it to over 100 people, but it really helps you focus on the important things and staying positive. And I get up every morning and in the shower, I have positive affirmations that I say to myself, and I try and put myself into the mindset of what's going to happen for that day and the positivity. My whole life, I never asked myself, was I going to be successful? I knew I was going to be successful. In my whole life, I never said, hey, I can't afford that. I said, how can I afford that? And I knew everything was going to come true. I didn't know when it was going to come true, but it was never even a 1% doubt in my mind that anything I said I was going to do was going to happen. And, the funny thing that Jesse Itzler says on his video is he said when he was broke, sleeping on the couch of 19 different friends, he walked into the office every day and said, I'm a millionaire. They just haven't paid me yet. I'm a millionaire. They just haven't paid me yet. And, I love the positivity, and the words you speak matter. And if you say something's going to happen, it's going to happen. If you don't, it's probably not.
Yeah, we talked about that with Mark about dreaming big, but I want to get back into this video. The word I remember was outstanding. And I
Yep.
want you to tell people. So I believe Jesse decided that he wanted to, I think, run 100 miles. It was like 100-mile competition that people rarely finish. So he finds this like Navy SEAL that is like the toughest Navy SEAL around. And he, I guess, invites him to his house, like to coach him. But then when his wife saw him, and I think his wife's pretty famous too. She's the woman that started Spanx. Tell more about that story, what
Yeah.
actually happened.
So, Jesse had been watching a podcast or something, and he heard this Navy SEAL who took someone who, had never ran before, and he finished a 100-mile race. And Jesse was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, how could that happen? He goes, but it was a reputable podcast, and this guy's a Navy SEAL, so you never know. And at that point, Jesse was running, I don't know, maybe 35 miles, but he couldn't break his 35 miles. So he called this, Navy SEAL over, again, create your own luck. He got him over to the house, and he tells the story about the first few days. He didn't do much. He just kind of looking at him. And finally, the guy said, hey, look, we're going to start our mission at, I don't know, 5 a.m. We're going to meet in the kitchen at 4:45. And Jesse was like, well, we're going to meet for breakfast for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to go beat my 35-mile record. So they talk about when they're having breakfast, and he said how the Navy SEAL said to him, he said, look, today we're going to do 3 things and 3 things only. And if you do these 3 things, you're going to shatter your 35-mile record. And he talks about these things, and he says, look, the first thing we're going to do is we're never going to give our pain a voice. He says, I know things are tough, family, marriage, sales, building a business, running, whatever it may be. But the minute you speak something, it becomes a reality. So if you say, I'm tired, I'm tired. If you say, I can't do it, I can't do it. So he said to Jesse, he said, if I ask you how you're doing, the only answer you're ever going to say is outstanding. Now, if you ask my 9-year-old Sebastian or my 4-year-old Nicholas, how are you doing today? They will say outstanding. So you're never going to give your pain a voice. Number 2 is we're never going to die in the chair. So either we go out there and we complete our mission, which is fantastic, or we go out there, we give it our all, and we fall flat in the middle of the race. But we are not going to come around each lap and sit down. We are not going to give up. So either we accomplish our mission or we die on the field doing it. Either one is okay. And lastly, we're going to be thankful. Every lap we do, we're going to talk about what are we thankful for? Because again, it could always be better. It could always be worse, but we're here. We're alive. We have shelter. We have food, and we're going to be thankful and we're going to be grateful. And if you do those 3 things, you're going to shatter your goal, which Jesse did.
And the funny part of the story, I remember because he was showing the video what this guy looked like. So he looked like a hillbilly from like the mountains of Kentucky. He had this long beard. He's covered in tattoos, and he had eyes that had seen things that you didn't want to see.
I think the word Jesse Itzler used was spooky.
Yeah, and also Jesse was so dismissive, like, yeah, right, like outstanding. But he ended up actually doing it, and it's just, I don't think that people understand how powerful our mind is and how like you said, words matter. And if you have internal talk that's saying, I'm a loser, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a that, then that's what you're going to be. And also the people that you hang around with, I try to tell my kids, like, no energy vampires in your life. If you have friends that are sucking the life out of you, not good. So pick your friends really well.
I think they say, like, show me your 5 best friends and we'll show you what you'll become.
So when we started R360, you were like literally the first person to become a partner. We have numbers. Are actually not 0, 1, and I'd love to hear that story. But we believe that wealth is more than money, and it's financial, intellectual, social, human, emotional, and spiritual. Of those, which one have you found the most difficult to work on? We're working on all of them simultaneously, but which one of those is kind of a continuous struggle for you, and why?
You know, maybe the biggest struggle is the emotional. And I say that, not because I have anything bad going on, but you have so many ups and downs in life, whether it's personal, whether it's business. It's not easy. And I've done things and I continue to do things to be the best that I could be, but that's something that's just ongoing. With that being said, there's other things I'd like to get more involved in, like spiritual. I haven't done a ton with spiritual, but, so I can't say it's my toughest because I really haven't begun that journey yet. But I'd have to say emotional. I mean, it's just, to me, that's just like we talked about, the words you speak matter, the mindset matters. If your emotional capital is not there, nothing else can be there.
Well, I just came back from India. I went on a spiritual retreat with my 26-year-old daughter, Amparo, and I would highly recommend. There was couples there from all over the world. It was really transformational. And if you can go next year, you will get a ton out of it. And I'd like to continue going, but that spiritual part is very important. And the spiritual is not only, some people connect it to their faith, but I think it's also more, what is your purpose? Why are you here? And how can you use the gifts that you have to benefit others? And when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you see more of a lawyer or a guardian angel for people?
Look, I'm a lawyer by name or by trade, right? But you know the story. I mean, 20% I'm a lawyer, 20% I'm a friend, 20% I'm a psychiatrist.
But you're
So look,
actually, but at the way you see it, I mean, in this asset protecting, you're protecting an asset that people have built, and also peace of mind.
yeah, I'm here so people can go to bed at night knowing that what they've worked their entire life for, day after day, hour after hour, is protected and they're not going to lose it. And look, it's one thing if somebody does something wrong, right? Okay, you do something wrong, you get sued. But in our society, you get sued for anything. I mean, people just bring anyone into the lawsuit because they think you may have deep pockets, or maybe your son's driving your car and because it's titled to you, you're home, your son, God forbid, gets in an accident and you get sued because you own the car and you lose it all. So it's so important. You work your whole life, but you don't want to be retired and one day you back out of your driveway and you hit a bicyclist. So just so important for people to be protected, feel protected, so they can sleep at night.
One of the most important decisions you're going to make is who your life partner is. And Ashley is wonderful. You have two boys. How important is that? And what advice are you giving them? They're probably too young, but what advice will you give them in terms of picking the right life partner?
Yeah, well, you said it. And first of all, my wife, I'm very, very lucky. I have the best wife in the world. She's just I can't even say the great things about her. She's such a great person, caring, great wife, great mom, helps everybody. The best way I could describe her is she's the type of person that if you said, "Oh, wow, I love those earrings. Where'd you get them?" She's taking them off and giving it to you. Like she is selfless and she puts everybody above herself. And her parents are the same way, my in-laws. I got very lucky with my in-laws.
Lucky, I have good in-laws, but I don't travel with them by myself to Italy. That's an amazing thing you got to tell us
Well,
about too.
yeah, I'll come back to that in one second. But I had another uncle, and again, I'll never forget this. Not the original one that was a mentor, but he said to me, he goes, "Hillel, you can either pick a good wife or a bad wife, and that will define a good or bad life." And you don't understand what he's saying back then when you're a kid, but he could not have been more correct. I mean, you pick the wrong life partner, and your day-to-day stress, it could be unbearable. So
And what are the
who
important things for you? What were like the decision points for you? Because you're Jewish, you didn't marry another Jewish person, you married someone from Italian descent, so you went across kind of religious cultures and stuff.
Yeah, but you know what? I find that the Jews and the Italians are very similar. I say that in the sense that they care about family, they care about tradition. So, while they're different, I think there are a lot of common themes, and that was important to me. I wanted someone who, was nice, caring, thoughtful, kind, appreciative. And with Ashley, I got all that and much, much more. And she's just a great, great person that helps us, me, the family, the kids, in every aspect of life.
And what's the story about traveling with your mother-in-law?
So once a year, I do a trip with me. At this point, my son Sebastian will do Nicholas, in a year or two once he gets older, and my mother-in-law. And it's just the three of us. My wife doesn't come. And I do it so my son can spend really great time with his grandmother. So this year we went to Dubai. Last year we went on about 10 nights in around Europe and Italy and France and did a cruise. And they're already telling me that next year they may want to go to Japan. We will see. But it's a really, really special
But
trip.
you're doing it for your son to bond with his grandmother.
Yeah. Look, of course, I love being with her as well. She's a great person. She's so generous. Again, just like my wife, puts everyone before her. And so, of course, I love being with her as well, but I really want them to spend special time together.
And were your grandparents important in your life?
Yeah, they were. My grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, my grandmother on my father's side. His father had passed away when he was a young kid, so I didn't ever get to meet him. But growing up, that was always special for us, whether it was going to the diner for breakfast, whether it was sleeping at their house, or taking some sort of trip. It was a really, really special. Unfortunately, all three of them have passed away. So I just want to make sure that Sebastian and Nicholas spend a really good time with their grandparents.
Right. Well, before letting you go, I have a couple of final questions. But what is the book that you most give out to people that has helped you, or are there any special podcasts that you listen to or other things that have been inspirational for you?
Yeah, so look, I love just kind of anything inspirational all over the web and reading. I love, but if I had to pick two, I'll pick one business and one non-business. From a business perspective, the first book I always give to everyone is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. What the rich teach their kids that the poor and middle class don't. Great, great, phenomenal starter business book.
And what are the key highlights that somebody will get from reading that book?
It's about mindset before it even goes into how to do things. It's mindset. It's about this guy who grew up and he had a quote unquote rich dad and a quote unquote poor dad. And the rich dad, the poor dad would say, hey, I can't afford it. The rich dad would say, how do I afford it? The poor dad would say, work for your money. The rich dad would say, let your money work for you. So it's really getting into that mindset of how to become this successful person. And of course, there's follow-up books to that as well. But to me, that was number one. And then from a non-business book, I love the Dalai Lama book, The Path to Tranquility. It's a very old book, but it's just, tons of different sayings. Each one's about a paragraph or could be a page or two. And I would read one every single day. And that book, The Path to Tranquility, I just thought was phenomenal.
And what are the main things that it taught you?
Again, being kind, being appreciative, being thankful, looking at the positive things in life versus the negative. It's all what you look at.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
My dad would always say, death and starvation are problems. Anything else is not a problem.
So that gave you a positive mental attitude, reframe things. So what question have I not asked that you'd like to answer, kind of leave the audience with?
I think we've covered a lot today. I mean, of course, right? We can go on and on and on, but no, I mean, I think maybe just what's the most valuable asset? Because I think growing up, right, it's all about how do you make it? How do you make yourself? How do you make it? And how do you do well? And most people are looking at it financially, right? They want to build a career. They want to buy their first home. They want to buy real estate, whatever it may be. But when you don't have those things are really, really important. When you have those things, you could care less. You realize they're just things, they're just material items. And to me, the most important asset in life is time and spending time with the people that you love, whether it's family, friends, whoever it may be, hopefully people that, affect you in a positive manner, and make you happy. But, at the end of the day, all the things don't matter. Sure, it's great to have a nice house or it's great to have a nice car and Yeah, you don't want to have to worry about, how you're going to pay for lunch. But at the end of the day, you're never going to be on your deathbed and saying, hey, I wish I worked an extra day, or hey, I wish I had an extra $1 million or 10 million or whatever the number is. You're going to be saying, hey, I wish I spent some more time with the people that I love. So I just think that's so important.
Yeah, I was on this recent trip to India. Someone said, hey, if you had to describe like R360 in 3 words, what would you say? And I said, it's easy. We're merchants of time. What does that mean? I said, well, uh, we believe wealth is more than money, something called the fishes. And at the end of the day, the most valuable thing that you have is your time. And when you're sitting in a group with 15 people that are kind of superhuman, 14 of them didn't graduate from college, 9 didn't graduate from high school, 5 of those were billionaires. And you have these networks, and you can ask anybody if you're having an issue, because you become kind of like brothers and sisters really close. Hey, I need help with this, I need help with that. And they will extend themselves. They will either solve it for you or introduce you to somebody, which then gives you back all this time that you can spend with those that you love and that you're close to. People don't remember your accomplishments. They remember how you made them feel and what impact did you have in their lives. So at the end of the day, what impact do you want to have in the world before you die, when people are thinking back, on your life and all the great accomplishments and things that you've done?
I really just hope that I can inspire and motivate people. And I don't care what that inspiration and motivation is. I don't care if it's for them to be a better husband. I don't care if it's for them to build a bigger business, but I want people to think positive, and I want them to know, just like I knew, you can accomplish anything that you want in life. You just have to say it, write it down, and do it. What is the end goal? Where do you want to be? And what are the specific and measurable steps you can take to get there? But there is nothing that's off limits. There is no goal that is too big or audacious. You can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. I don't care what the category is, you can accomplish it.
No, I agree with you. I had this guy, Julio Carbonell, that worked with me. He was Cuban and he wanted to be a professional baseball player. So he tried out for the Yankees. He wasn't good enough to be a player. So he ended up getting a degree in computer science, and he came back. He became the chief technology officer for Major League Baseball. So
And so
incredible.
he made the team, just in a different aspect.
Exactly. And he was negotiating with Steinbrenner, all these people. He had an incredible life. He just had to shift his view a little bit. And
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer of karma. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. When something happens that seems like it's not good, we find out later why it was good or what lesson we learned. I think it was Mike Tyson who said, look, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And they say, you make plans and God laughs at you. But it's the truth. We are all where we are supposed to be. And we will all get to where we're supposed to be. And we may think something's a setback, but that setback may be something great. Sebastian, not to get into it, he left the school. Today he graduated from his new school. Well, for the 2 weeks during transition, and we weren't sure where he was going to go, he's the happiest I've ever seen him be. So what may look like a setback at one point, you may look at the best thing that ever happened to you later in life.
wow, I am so happy for you. I was just in my YPO forum, and I may have you talk to a buddy of mine who has a daughter that's been having a tough time at school. And I had a daughter that had to basically leave schools as well because of just really negative stuff that happened, and went from Boca Raton to Boston. But things happen for a reason, and you get all worked up about them. But you gotta, just reframe. Like, what lesson am I being, taught by this? So, thank you for coming. Much appreciated, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.